Hey all, this is Nate, and this is not a new episode, for good reason. I am moving. We just bought a house, but I guess you could say we're attempting to move at the moment. I thought I'd be moving like today, but instead there's, the closing gets pushed, and then the painter can't start, and the mover needs another day, and the things have to be packed, and the mold guy, and on. And if you've bought a house, particularly in the post-2008 mortgage lending rules, in which there's a million documents that need to be supplied yesterday, you can probably relate. But where this matters to you, if it does at all, is that I just needed some time and space, and I've decided to take it now. So today, as I prepare to move out of a lovely house that has gotten a little too small for us, an old Craftsman in the foot of the hill where the Hollywood sign stands, to another one, a little bigger, at the foot of the hill where Griffith Park Observatory stands. This is the first house we've ever owned. This is the house where our daughter has spent every one of her 10 years, Thanksgivings, Christmases, Passover Seders, where my wife and I entered our 40s, when our careers took shape, the place where every episode of The Memory Palace has been recorded, the place where we have lived for 11 of the house's 101 years. I'm going to play you an old episode about another old house, and then I will be back with a new story from a new old house a couple of weeks down the road. Here you go. This is The Memory Palace. I'm Nate DiMeo. I spent my 20s in Providence. I lived in a 2-story tenement on the west side of the city, on the other side of the highway from downtown, and the other side of the tracks from Brown University and the fancy houses of the east side. My mom grew up in that house. Her father did too. And after my grandfather died at 86 years old, it turned out that his widow couldn't take living there anymore. She couldn't take sharing her space with the ghosts of days spent with her husband and their daughters, with her husband's family, and of herself as a young bride that would appear in every corner. At the top of the stairs, at the sink by the window, in the empty side of the bed. So my grandmother moved out, and I moved in. I loved it. And not just because I was 23 and aimless and got to live by myself, rent-free, in this big old house. I loved the house. Growing up, it had echoed with stories, endlessly repeated at big Italian family dinners, during the tail ends of Christmases with the dying embers, and some uncle conked out in the maroon velour chair. For visitors, for new audiences, the stories were stretched and embellished. For close family, they were invoked. They were compressed like Mandarin proverbs until they could be summoned by a couple of brushstrokes. Dad and the Studebaker. Mom's broken finger. Janice through the bathroom window. I loved those stories. I surely tell stories now because I loved those stories then. And despite the sheer volume and breadth of memories and anecdotes that pile up in the dusty corners of a house occupied by one family since 1914, despite the vast quantity of potential material, most of the stories, the ones in heavy rotation, were drawn from a single shelf. For several years, from the late 1930s through the end of World War II, my grandfather ran a nightclub on the banks of the Patuxent River. It started out as the Hi-Ho and was eventually rebranded the Club Baghdad, complete with an oasis painted on the wall and a general Casablanca Edward Saidi vibe. They did a full review. Crooners, comedians, mid-sized big bands, showgirls, national touring acts, second-tier mob bosses. My grandfather was the MC. One night, a few of the dancers got the flu, and my grandfather called a talent agency up in Boston for some fill-in showgirls. One of them turned out to be my grandmother. And so there are reasons the stories I heard the most were from this era. Because they are the origin stories of one iteration of the family. My mom and her 3 sisters loved to hear about their mom and dad falling in love. And these stories were great. They were glamorous and dramatic. Dad and the Studebaker and Mom's broken finger are good stories. But the club stories were the day the bear got loose, Dad's 2 girlfriends, the night the Russian midgets got stuck in the snow, the night the Great Dane danced with the stick-up man, the night my grandmother climbed up the ladder where my grandfather stood hanging the star on the Christmas tree by the coat check and surprised them with their first kiss, or the day they piled into the back seat of the bartender's car on the way back from the beach. She sat on my grandfather's lap, and he held her hand, and she had never noticed her hand was so small, and she knew that she loved him. I heard that story 100 times. The last time I was holding her hand, and it was so small, while my grandfather lay dying in an adjustable bed at Rhode Island Hospital, not long before I moved into the house. The House of Stories was also a house of stuff. 80-something years of stuff, packed into closets and crawl spaces, and crumbling cardboard boxes stacked in locked rooms. Cigarette cases and tie pins and Bakelite clocks and roller skate keys, all of it. My mom and her sisters, no longer needing to ask their parents' permission to poke around in the basement, would send me on missions. One of them would call me up and say stuff like, "There's this big Coke sign, I think, from when Uncle Leo ran the concession stand in Narragansett in the 50s. It would look amazing over my new stove." And I'd go digging. But there was one artifact they all wanted more than any other. The holy grail of family objects was a record. They said the Club Baghdad had a record pressing machine. It was a small device that would actually carve a recording onto an acetate disc. They had this promotion for a while at the club where you could pay $1 and then sing with the band and take the record home, like karaoke or something. So somewhere in the house, they all swore, was a recording of the floor show at the Baghdad. If I could find it, they could hear the Club Baghdad, hear Dad sing, hear the comedy bits he'd written, hear him introduce the show